So let's take a look at the few ways we can add CSS to an HTML document. So what I'm going to do is open up this HTML folder that we created, and I'm just going to drag this entire folder into my Sublime Text icon here. If you're on a Mac, you can do this, and what it'll do is it'll open this whole folder for us right here on the left, and we can see all the folders we have right here, and that way I can kind of go in between all the pages I need on the left here. So that's very useful to have this kind of file bin over here. Now, if you're not sure how to do that on a Mac or a PC, you can also just open up Sublime Text. So start up Sublime Text and then go to File. And if you click Open and then select an actual folder to open, it'll do the same thing as opposed to just selecting an individual file. So I'm going to select this HTML folder where we have some HTML files. And I'll hit open. So now let's take a look at this index.html file here. So I'm going to open up this HTML folder. I'm just going to open up this file in a browser, and I can do it by right-clicking and saying open with the browser of choice. Or likewise, you can just go directly to that file by typing in its actual directory in the URL tab. So there's a few ways you can do that. So we need this here just to look at our progress as we go through it. Now, let's take a look at how we can actually apply CSS. So one way we can do it is by adding CSS directly onto a particular element. So I'm going to space this out a little bit so that you can see this clearly. And if you don't have any HTML elements on your page, make sure you just set yourself up with a standard HTML document. Remember, you need the doc type declaration, you need the HTML opening tag, the head tags, and then the body tag where we're going to put all of our code that shows up in the white space here of this browser, right? And then you need to close that. So let's add CSS directly to an element. This is one of the ways you can add CSS. Okay, so we can add it directly on an element, and the way we do that is we add a special attribute here called style. So remember, attributes are just these added pieces of code we can add inside of the opening tags in HTML. So again, we want to follow the same format we do with any attribute. We say style and then equal sign and then quotation marks. And then in here I can say color :red. So what I've just written where it says color :red, and you can have a space here if you want to make it a little clearer, that is pure CSS right there. So now when I save the file and refresh, you're going to see this will change. Now this shows up as red. So that's CSS, and this is what we call inline CSS. We're writing CSS directly inside of our HTML. And this is actually considered a bad idea. People recommend against this because what happens is you're clustering your CSS code inside the HTML and it gets really messy really fast. Ideally, what you want to do is have your CSS in a separate location, leave your HTML alone, and have it do only HTML. That way you have some code separation and we're not mixing and matching. So that's one way to do that. And you could technically do it to any of these elements, right? We could go in here and add any kind of a CSS rule, and we'll learn these CSS rules here going forward, but just know that you can go in and affect any of these elements. So apart from adding it internally like this with inline CSS, we can actually do it up here in the head tag, or really anywhere in this document. We can add what we call special style tags here. So you have an opening tag and a closing tag. And then what we can do is add our CSS rules here. So let's say I want to change the color. Let's refresh this back to where it was. Let's say I want to change the color of the H1 tag, but I want to do it from here. So this is going to be a little bit cleaner than writing it in line. So if I write it up here, I can write H1, and then we have this curly brace format, and we'll want to tab this in a bit. So now inside these curly braces, I can add a CSS rule like color red. Now again, I don't expect you to know what I mean by a CSS rule, but this is the format of how CSS looks. So now if I save it and refresh, this means that any h1 tag that shows up on the page will be colored red. So we've just written pure CSS code here, but now instead of doing it inside of our HTML, we're writing it up here in these special style tags. Now I could technically take this and place it down here at the very bottom, and it should still work. As I refresh the page, you can see this is still red. So that's fine. We could do that. But now I'm going to leave it up here, and we can add more rules up here. So I could now go and affect all of the other h2 tags, right? So I could say anywhere that there's an h2 tag, let's give it a border. 1 pixel, we'll make it a solid border and make it red. So if I save that, and notice that I don't have to break these curly braces out into multiple lines. I'll space this out just so that you can see some of this CSS code a little clearer. You can break it out into multiple lines like that, or you could leave it in one line if it's not going to be too long. So now when I save it and refresh, this h2 tag here just got a red border. So you're starting to see how we can start adding some color and some styles. And while these look ugly for now, we'll learn how to kind of use these to our advantage to make things look good. So take a look at the Facebook homepage again, just going with this example. We're seeing a lot of CSS on this page, and this is standard. You should expect to see a lot of CSS on, well-designed pages. So we've got this background color here of a dark blue, that kind of Facebook blue. And we've got this green button here. These are all being created by CSS. We can even choose fonts with CSS, so we don't have to use this kind of standard serif font that HTML comes up with. So this is the second way we can add CSS styles, is in our HTML documents in these special style tags. But even that's not the most preferred way to add CSS. So the preferred way to actually do this is in an external document. So here's how we do that. All we have to do is add this special link tag. And if you recall, I said that the head section of the HTML documents are special, right? So the stuff that we put up here doesn't render out in this white space, but we can do things like link up CSS files up here. And this is the appropriate place to do that. So we can go link tag, and then we give it this special attribute here called rel, and then style sheet is what we put inside of that. And then all we need is just to link it to a separate CSS file. So usually we'll call them style.css. You'll see that's a very common name for CSS files. And this is the CSS extension. So I could call it whatever I want. I could call it index to match the name of this document we're working in. But I'm just going to stick with convention and call it style. So now that I've done that, all I need to do is add a new file somewhere in the same directory as this index file. And as long as it's named style.css, any CSS written there will get imported into this page. So I'll show you how that works. We can just right click on this HTML folder here and say new file, and we'll call it style.css. And if I save, make sure you save it in the exact same folder where your index.html file is. And then just clear that. And if I save it, okay, and I've cleared out all the CSS from this page. It's just HTML in here now. If I refresh, it's going to look the way it did before. Now there's no CSS affecting it. But just keep in mind, this is now importing styles in. And just to show you, if I go back to the style sheet, and if I write h1, we'll color it maybe purple this time. And if I save it, and notice you don't have to get this spacing quite perfectly, as long as you follow the syntax order. And I refresh, there you go. Now this is showing up as purple, if you can see that. So we've just looked at 3 ways to add CSS to an HTML document. We can add it inline by adding these special style attributes and putting it in there, but that's a bad idea. That's kind of just the old way we used to do it. We can add these special style tags where they have an opening and then a closing style tag. And then we can place our CSS in there. Or likewise, we can just leave it in a separate document, and that's the cleanest way to do it. That is the recommended way to do it, and that's how we're going to do it going forward.